Alrighty, guys. Andrew Bobros here. So I want to do a video on Brandon Staley's notes. As you guys know, I like to see what Brandon Staley says and review his notes. I'm also shooting from the Nook. This is my little spot here in Arizona right now. So there's a couple different locations I'll shoot from. But yeah, I got the little bolt here, Charger logo. Guys, we're in the playoffs. Amazing. So let's see what Brandon Staley's notes really say about ultimately the, making it to the actual playoffs and, kind of where we sit here. So let's go through the transcript together. What do you guys think? So first and foremost, let's talk about Brandon Staley. Again, I've been hypercritical of Brandon Staley at different times. You guys all know that, right? Taking some heat from a few of you folks. But, the one thing that I will say is, again, the defense was underperforming. The offense was underperforming, right? Last year, we were top 5 offense, right? And this year, we're not even a top 5 offense at this point. The defense is as bad, if not worse, than we were even when Gus Bradley was our defensive coordinator. So, but the thing that I've learned about Brandon Staley specifically is that he's done a very good job of keeping this team together with a ton of adversity, right? And that's really what a head coach needs to do in the NFL, in my opinion. And so moving forward, I think that's a really good thing to think about, right? It's not just about each one of the positions. And yes, offense can struggle, defense can struggle. We talked quite a bit about this in the last video that James and I did live on Friday, that really Brandon Staley and hasn't done a whole lot to change the defense, but the players on the defensive side have just really stepped up together and said, hey, we need to do better and we need to hold each other accountable. And that's what they're doing to become so successful. So it's been very exciting seeing the defense switch around. And again, there's only so much a head coach can do. That's one of the things that I've learned this season specifically, right? Is it's not just about the head coach, right? I guess, maybe naively, I thought, you know what? The head coach, it all falls on his shoulders and he has to make everything work. Well, I think this season we've learned that the players also have to step up together and win for each other. And if they're not doing that, they're not going to succeed. So it's something to really think about. And, that's one of the things I've definitely learned this season. And that's where Brandon Staley, I think, is very good at getting his team to perform for one another. And I think that's a really good trait. So let's go through the notes. I want to talk a little bit about Brandon Staley specifically. And again, Brandon Staley, really has impressed me with these last 3 games specifically, right? I think we're number 1 in offense and number 1 in defense in a number of different categories. So it's been really great seeing that, performance. But again, it's because the players stepped up, because the players realized, hey, look, we have an opportunity to be successful here. So let's make this happen. So, all right, let's talk a little bit about, first of all, again, they keep talking about Derwin James, right? That hit that he had, by the way, I do not think that was, should have been targeting, but it was called as targeting, which is really frustrating. But at the end of the day, it is what it is. And right now he's in the concussion protocol right now. Look, Derwin James is an amazing football player. And every time I look at DJ out there, he does a lot of great things, right? He had that awesome pick. But again, he gave up 30 points in personal fouls, right? So, that one hit they got ejected from, and the one right before, I think it was either the play before or the play before that. And, he gave up 30 yards on that play. I think that's actually the same drive that they got a field goal on. So, it's something that, if I look back on the Colts game and say, well, what did we need to fix? It was personal foul penalties or just penalties in general. I think we had 6 penalties for 50 yards or 45 yards, something of that nature. So it's pretty interesting. Apparently Xander Horvath got a little hurt. He got an ankle sprain. But it's awesome finally seeing this team not have a lot of injuries, right? I mean, and I asked myself this question: why does this happen more at the beginning of the season or the end? And I sometimes wonder if it's conditioning, if it's these players' bodies getting ready for the season. So that's something that really needs to be looked at. I mean, there was just so many dang injuries at the beginning of the season. As we know, we're getting players back, which is a good thing, right? Because we're in the playoffs and we're ready for a Super Bowl run. Anyways, not sure where Horvath stands. Be very interesting. I would like to see some other folks maybe step in as a 2 running back sets. I've talked about that quite a bit. I like the idea of having, Spiller out there potentially, with Austin Eckler and also, Josh Kelly, right? So maybe they can do some more 2 running back sets, which I think would be really cool. So anyways, so it's interesting. So I watched a lot of video. I'm going to talk a little bit about this really quickly. I also put a couple links in the description below, a couple of interviews of Brandon Staley. I've watched a lot of video interviews of Brandon Staley specifically. And there's a lot to be said about the way I love body language. Body language is amazing to me, but the way Brandon Staley handles certain things is very interesting to me because he doesn't clearly after a win, he's a lot more upbeat, right? And happy. After a loss, of course, it's the exact opposite, right? But the thing that I've noticed about Brandon Staley, he has done a pretty good job of staying pretty stoic across the board, right? Winning, losing, he does a pretty good job of just keeping himself, even keeled, right? And I guess the argument in that is that you don't want to show too much emotion, right? If you're showing weakness or frustration, then it tends to boil over into the team's performance, right? So you don't want to do that. But Brandon Staley's done a pretty good job of staying fairly even keeled, through this whole season of adversity, right? Because we all know this season had a ton of adversity, but it really has been interesting seeing. So they're talking a lot about in this question right here, the last two games. What do you guys want to do now? Again, I've seen so many arguments going back and forth on resting players, keeping people back, for the playoffs, and maybe even sitting Herbert. But again, my brother did a video yesterday about the playoff position, right? We want to get the fifth seed. The fifth seed's a way to go. That's the easiest path to victory because we play the Jags or the Titans, and both. And again, I'd rather play the Titans, but we'll probably play the Jags if we get the fifth seed because the Jags are a much better team right now. They're hitting their stride. They destroyed us. And so, it'd be very interesting to see how that plays out. So anyways, very interesting to see how that'll all work out together, moving forward. But, so what's the plan moving forward with the two regular season games? I think it's a very interesting thing to discuss, right? Because again, you want to sit players, how do you want to handle it? Again, there are two big players coming back potentially for the playoffs. That's Bosa and that's also Slater. So, that'd be awesome if we can get Rashawn Slater back and, obviously Bosa for sure. So again, there's rumors that Bosa's coming back potentially this week. I don't know that that's really true. I do think there is a chance he could come back, but again, Brandon Staley's talked about it many times. Don't know. We'll let you know. I would venture a guess he might come back. I just don't know. You really have to wonder what bringing him back would be like, right? The team is playing so well on defense. Why bring him back is kind of my view. And I even look with Derwin at this point. Why bring Derwin back at this point? I'd almost rather let him sit and let Bosa sit for another 2 games, get completely healthy, and let the team play that they're playing right now. They're doing a great job, right? So there's, no real reason to rush them back. So we'll see how that plays out moving forward. So 2 final season games. He says we're going to take it game by game. I know he specifically talked about the Rams in his interview that he had yesterday. And he said, look, the Rams are a great team. It was interesting what he even said, too, is that Sean McVay's had an amazing season he's coached this season, right? And everyone would say, well, his record's not good. But the reality is it's not just about records. It's also about keeping a team together. It's about keeping cohesiveness, making sure the locker room's happy, especially after losses, right? I mean, that's very difficult. It's probably the biggest thing that you pay a head coach for is to keep the team moving forward through adversity. So it is interesting to see how that will play out with them. But again, that'll be an interesting game, right? I mean, it's battle for LA. We all know that conversation was huge for a long time. Who's gonna win the hearts of the LA fan base, right? And so right now, I will say this: there's more Charger fans showing up to games than Rams fans. So that'll be very interesting. And I know my brother will be there as well. Kyle will be there. My sister will probably be there. I will not make it, unfortunately, but anyways, so catch up with my brother if you can. So anyway, so it's interesting to see how that's going to play out. But so it's going to be a case by case basis. I do think it's good to keep people out at certain situations, especially when we're playing teams like the Rams and the Broncos, right? 2 teams that have really nothing to play for. And quite frankly, they probably want to lose so they can get a better draft pick. I mean, look at the Broncos are an absolute disaster. Of course, to them, it doesn't really matter because, they've given up, I think, their first round pick this last draft. And then this draft will go to Seattle. So they keep losing. It just helps Seattle even more. Anyways. But again, as he says, our goal is to play well this week against the Rams and compete at a high level. That's the whole point, right? You want to continue winning. So 11-6 is the goal, and I'm really hoping that's how it plays out, right? Again, he talks a little bit about the Rams. Again, he talks about the coaching. They're amazing. They've had a challenging season. And I love what Brandon Staley always says is they demand full attention, right? So no matter what, even with the record where it stands at the moment, they don't care. Look, we still are going to focus on the Rams and treat it as any other game, any other week. And that's one thing that I have been very happy to see, the way that he's really managed that conversation. Again, uh, they're playing for respect at this point, but we are playing for higher, positions in the upcoming playoffs. Kenneth Murray's performance, I think, has been great. It's interesting seeing how that's changed, right? I never quite understood why he was struggling, because there were so many moments where he started playing well. When I was reading this, it made me think a little bit about someone we lost, right? We let go. We let Speed Bump go, aka Jerry Tillery. It would be really interesting to see if he was still with the team at this moment, right? What his playing time would have looked like. I mean, obviously, we won't know what that is or what that isn't, but how would he have improved if that would have happened, right? Because you think about this for a second, this is the team coming together as a group, as a cohesive unit. And I always felt like Tiller was always just sort of there, but not really there, and cared, but didn't really care. Again, that's my perspective. Whether that's true or not true, I wouldn't know. But my point is, it's one of those situations you sit back and say to yourself, okay, how would he have performed? And I kind of look at just the same thing as Kenneth Murray, right? Kenneth Murray has started performing so much better. He's finally there. He's becoming a leader, and he's becoming the linebacker that we wanted him to be. Again, we traded up to get him, right? So he's finally playing great, right? And it's awesome to see that he's improving every single game that he goes out there. Again, it's a second season, injuries. He's had some challenges, right? But it's great to see him finally step up and become that linebacker we think he could be. But here's the thing, though. I think this guy right here, it's almost criminal that he's not in the Pro Bowl. At least I don't think he was put in the Pro Bowl even as an alternate. But he's had an amazing season, and he's been really the heart of the defense. Save obviously Derwin James, of course. But it's just been great seeing him develop as well, and the offense and defense develop as well too, right? And I still think the offense has some more things to go, but bottom line, everyone's improving, right? Drew Tranquill's improving. Kenneth Murray's improving, right? It's great to see them come together as a team. You can see it. You guys all can see it. You can feel it. And there's still a lot of improvements that both things they can do, right? And again, it just goes into the conversation of, general improvement. That's one of the things I really have really liked about Brandon Staley specifically, is he always knows there's ways to improve. I mean, there's plays. You missed this. This didn't happen correctly. You didn't stunt right here. You should have blitzed this gap, not this gap, or, all kinds of different things, right? And that's one of the things that, you can tell with this team, they're okay of improving as a unit and as a group. And I think that's pretty exciting. So, again, let's talk about Justin Herbert now. So let's go a little bit into the offense. I think it's interesting. I read a lot of articles about how a lot of people are like, oh, Justin Herbert's not a leader. He's not really, that guy, right? And I always sit back and ask myself this question, right? What does a NFL quarterback have to be? I even look at like Tom Brady. Tom Brady, for a long time in his career, wasn't really that outspoken. He started getting more outspoken after a while. And, so I keep looking at like Justin Herbert, and he's starting to become more and more vocal, right? He's making more audibles at the line, and he's definitely a quiet leader, right? And I remember having a conversation with Bull Pride 602 at the game, right? We broadcast live there, and we were talking with him a lot. And we talked a lot about Phil Rivers and Justin Herbert are very similar, but they're very different personalities, right? Phil Rivers was very outspoken, very emotional, but that also got in the way of his performance at times, right? He would get emotional. He would make some bad decisions. Whereas Justin Herbert is just very steady Eddie. He doesn't let his emotions dictate his performance, which I think is really great. And it's a big part of success in the NFL, in my opinion. And I think a lot of people really respect Justin, so they try to compete hard for him, right? His teammates, his coaches. because I don't know if you know this or not, but most of the time after practice, he's out there throwing the ball for about another hour, hour and a half, working on routes, working on throwing the ball, and really getting the ball out to his wide receivers. He's working on his timing, so he puts in extra effort all the time. Now, look at someone like a Phil Rivers. Phil Rivers never really did that, right? His whole thing was when practice was done, he went home. He also had 10 or 12 kids, or I don't even remember how many kids he's got at this point, but the point is he didn't have time to do what Justin Herbert does. Justin Herbert focuses on football, right? And that's what makes him so successful, right? So, anyways, and again, his first 2 years have been nothing but amazing. We all know the records he's broken as well too, which is really interesting. I mean, it's the most yardage by anyone in the first 3 years of their career. Probably not going to break Dan Marino's touchdown record, which I think is really interesting and also sad at the same time. But I think a part of that is not his fault. It's the fault of, injuries for one. That's probably the biggest reason. And that's, and secondarily, I would almost say Joe Lombardi. Again, my frustration with Joe Lombardi is still always there. I still think he's holding Herbert back to some degree. And I read a lot of articles that would outline that a whole lot. So very interesting kind of conversation there. Anyways, but again, he's been an incredible year for us. He's done great. I mean, through adversity, right? Fractured rib cartilage. You cannot understate how hard that is to throw a football if you have a rib injury. I've had a rib injury before. Super hilarious story the way it happened. I won't go into it today. Maybe on our live stream I'll tell you about it. But so if you guys remind me during the live stream, and I will tell you how I got my rib injury. It's actually a pretty hilarious story. But it's tough. You can't laugh. You can't do anything. I mean, you can't really move laterally. I mean, it's very, very, very difficult to do anything, let alone throw a ball with accuracy to your wide receivers. So it's interesting. But this is a good line right here too. Quarterbacks are defined in the postseason. Quarterbacks are defined in the postseason. And, I think that's really, to me, this line right here was a direct conversation to Justin Herbert from his head coach. Look, the thing that I will say, again, going back to the Phil Rivers and Justin Herbert conversation, obviously Phil Rivers was not good in the playoffs. He just wasn't, right? I think his emotions got the best of him in most cases in the playoffs. But Justin Herbert's very good at keeping his emotions in check. Now, there's also a contract year for him, so he could potentially, he could have a renegotiated contract after this season. I mean, how much money would we be paying him if we go to the Super Bowl, win the Super Bowl, and how much money would we have to pay Justin Herbert? I don't even want to fathom it, but at the end of the day, it's going to be interesting to see how that goes. So again, that's a whole nother conversation. But again, I really like this line. Quarterbacks are defined in the postseason. That's how the history of this game is written, in the postseason. And there's a lot to be said about that, right? There's a lot to be said about that. Now he gets the opportunity to compete. And again, I remember Rex Ryan and a few other, commentators talking quite a bit about that, how it was such a criminal situation and they were blaming, Brandon Staley for not making the postseason and all this and that. And, a lot of that falls on him, right? Because, we didn't make it and that was partially his fault. And, there's a lot of things that happened there. So anyways, the one thing I would say is I want him to be healthy. So I wouldn't mind putting him on a snap count. We get a nice lead, we'll see what happens, right? We might see some of the other backups come in, kind of go from there, but it'd be interesting to see. But I'm happy for him. I'm happy for our team as well too. Okay. Joey Bosa, day-to-day basis. Don't need to talk about that. He gets asked this question, right? Are you worried about the offensive production? Me and my brothers talk about this a lot, right? And I feel like there's a lot to be said about that. It's been odd this season, right? And I would say part of the reason why it's been odd is that we've had so many injuries. Keenan Allen's hamstring, Parham's hamstring, Williams high ankle sprain. We've had so many people out, right? It's made it very difficult for there to be any consistency or any production or cohesiveness as a team, especially the offensive line too. We got 3 rookies on that line, and it's difficult to make that work. Now, if we get Rashawn Slater back, we'll have our left tackle back. You could even move Jamari Sawyer to the right side, but I think Pipkins has done a great job as well. So I don't know why you would really need to do that at this point. And again, so my question is, am I worried? I would say I'm not worried. I think we're going to score points, especially when you have someone like a Justin Herbert, Allen Williams. If we're healthy going into the playoffs, watch out, guys. We're a dangerous team. But again, the problem is consistency. We've really, really struggled with that. But you can't be consistent when you're not on the field, right? Again, this team has dealt with so much injuries that it's been very difficult. Rhythm, operation, attacking, negative plays. These are all things that we've dealt with this entire season. So it's very difficult, right? Again, and what was it? The third quarter production issues, right? I mean, think about that for just a second. We haven't scored a touchdown in the third quarter in 10 straight games. Guys, think about that for a second, right? And we talked about that in the post-game show after we beat the Colts and locked in playoffs. But look, if I was Lombardi, I would, coming out of the half, I would script another 20 plays that I'm going to run because they're running XYZ defense, 75% of the time. 75% of the time, these plays will work against that type of defense, right? I would specifically switch up what I'm doing and script out another 20 plays. Right? If you think about how many plays are run in a game, you're looking about 60 to 70 plays a game with the Chargers because we pass a lot. Well, really 50 to 70 is probably the right number. 50 on a low number, 70 on a high number, right? So it's one of those things where I would script out 20 plays to start with, and then I would script out 20 plays after the half. And I don't know why we're not doing it. I mean, maybe we are, but I'm not seeing them talk about that. I'm not seeing them say, okay, let's go with these plays. And that's where I start having issues with Joe Lombardi specifically. And so again, this is my frustration with the Joe Lombardi. But I will give this argument also, though. Offense is much more difficult to coach than defense because defense is fairly simple, right? It's, you've got XYZ different things you have to do, right? You're playing zone, you're playing man, you're playing these everything. It's pretty similar no matter what. But offense, you've got different play schemes, you've got different motions. There's a lot of different moving parts to be successful in the offense. So it is really interesting to see. But again, I think there are a few things. It's really rhythm. I think the red zone has been horrible. And again, we're not playing against the best defenses in the league, and we will be playing the best defenses in the league in the playoffs. So that's a concern, right? It's something to think about. Again, I think my prediction is the playoffs will expose whether Joe Lombardi is a good offensive coordinator or a bad offensive coordinator. It really will expose that. So again, that's my biggest concern is his play calling specifically. So, it's definitely something to think about. But again, it's not just been one person. It's been kind of the whole cohesiveness as an offensive unit. And you're right. They just have to pull it together. Speaking of Lombardi, before I go into this, he was asked specifically, Brandon Staley was specifically asked about Joe Lombardi. He said, we're happy to have him. He's been great. There's a lot to be said about Joe Lombardi, positively and also extremely negatively. Again, the positives is that he's kept the team together with a lot of adversity, right? I mean, with the amount of injuries we've had on offense, the locker room could have been lost, okay? But he kept it together, I think largely because of Brandon Staley specifically. But I think secondarily, Joe Lombardi's done a good job of keeping things very simple for the players that stepped up, right? You got the Bandy, you got, DeAndre Carter, right, has had a really great season for us. So you have to give him credit for that. But again, the inventiveness, just is always in question with me with Joe Lombardi. So it's kind of a frustrating situation to think about. But now, one of the unsung heroes on the team has been Kyle Van Noy. He was just recently on. Oh my gosh, why am I drawing a blank on his name? He played for the Colts. Holy smokes! He was playing on his show. It'll come to me as I talk about this. But Kyle Van Noy talked quite a bit about how different Brandon Staley is compared to Bill Belichick, and Brandon Staley is more like a new school. Bill Belichick's an old school. Kyle Van Noy specifically came out and said that Brandon Staley is very good at making a connection with every player. And that means a lot, right? Because if you don't like your head coach, you kind of sometimes don't care to make him look good. You know that old statement, right? You get more friends with honey than you do with vinegar, right? Well, Bill Belichick, I think, is vinegar, right? He's one of those guys that doesn't care. Hey, look, I won championships. How many championships you won? None. Okay, listen to me. Brandon Staley takes a completely different approach. He's a friend with that person. He does a good job with that person, and he improves that person's game. And specifically, that's one of the things Kyle Van Noy came out with. And so he was a big reason why they're doing these dinners together, and they're integrating offense and defense and special teams, and everyone's just involved as a team. And it will be interesting to see what happens with him. I know Brandon Staley consistently talks about him being like a coach, and he consistently is like, he's an on-field leader, and he really has been, right? I mean, these past few games, he's had a number of sacks. He's done a great job leading the defense to really step up and become better, which I think is great. So yeah. And so bottom line, that's what we're doing, talking about, the Chargers definitely moving forward. And it's one of those things that we have to sit back and think, okay, how are we going to improve? And again, I think he thinks like a green dot. He thinks like a coach. And you can see that on the tape. He does a lot of good things to make this team better. And I think that's really where it goes moving forward. Anyways, so I could talk about him all day. Again, I know him from BYU days. Going to the Patriots, I always rooted for him as a person. I know he's a smart guy. He's a very good coach, on-field coach, but he's also a very good linebacker. Not the best, not the flashiest, but he's really great. Working with Khalil Mack, Joey Bosa, all these guys are very important, parts of the offense or parts of the defense to really become successful. And again, he really does have one of those dominant type of body types. The one thing I will say, he wanted to be an edge rusher a lot more when he came to the Chargers. He's now getting that opportunity to do it now. He's not the best edge rusher. He doesn't have quite the speed that he needs, but he uses his brains very well. I think he's much better at run stopping than he has been at rushing the edge. But he's done a pretty good job of setting the edge and helping with the run game. Now we get Bosa back and Mack. Watch out. Again, this is a really good point. There's a lot of intangibles that you can't minimize. So again, he's done a great job. Asante Samuel, let's talk about him for a little bit. He's fantastic, right? His makeup is great. His confidence, he does play with a chip on his shoulder. I don't know if you watched the video of him. I think it came out week 1 or week 2 where he went back to his high school and how he was always too short, always too smart, and nobody believed in him, but he was always one of those guys that stepped up and he says, no, I can do it. I can do anything. And he has confidence. He can overcome any mistakes, right? And he does a very good job of playing. You notice, guys, they're not throwing to him very often. The funny thing is they always are throwing to Mike Davis, and Mike Davis is playing lights out this season. So I kind of find that funny to me that they respect Asante Samuel Jr. so much more than Mike Davis, but Mike Davis is still stepping up and shutting people down. So I just find that very interesting. And, so again, it's one of those things where, again, he wants to play hard. He wants to play fast. And, that's where we're at, right? So it's one of those situations where he's, doing a good job. And the one thing that I will say also about just the general defense, they're playing more connected. I know I watched a video, I think it was about 2 or 3 weeks ago, that Brandon Staley talked about specifically the defense, that they're playing kind of a man hybrid zone, right? And so again, that's communication, right? Do I have safety help up top? Do I cover this guy? How far do I cover this guy in the zone? Or how far am I covering this guy? Am I going to jam him at the line? These are all things that need to be communicated with the rest of the team. And this is kind of where I was a little frustrated with having Derwin James out there. And don't get me wrong, he's the best player on the field, but Derwin James does so many different things. Sometimes he can leave a hole in the defense. And I think that's where not having Derwin James has been okay, because I think they're playing better team defense. I know it sounds a little weird to say, but because Derwin is kind of moving free, there's a hole in the zone or an area where there might not be an open space. So there will be an open space. So it's been really interesting to see that, how that's played out. But Samuel has done a great job, and it's been awesome seeing those guys. So I don't really want to go too into this, the mental transition from playing regular season to playoffs again. This video is about 32 minutes already. Look, bottom line, every game matters. At this point, you got to win out, right? And you got to win out just because you want to get the number 5 seed to be great. You do want the team to be healthy moving into the playoffs. I mean, if we can lock the 5th seed, then at that point, okay, maybe we don't need to play the last game and treat it as a bit of a off week or a bye week. We can have the rest of our B teamers come in, or people we want to see do a little bit more work. But again, there's a lot to be said about thinking through that, right? At any rate, I don't really want to go too deep into this. There's a lot you can talk about that. But again, this is where it stands, right? They have to think differently about moving into the playoffs and being healthy into the playoffs. So guys, let's just wrap up and kind of go from here, right? At the end of the day, good news is we are in the playoffs, guys. We are in the playoffs, and we are extremely happy that we're there. But again, guys, at the end of the day, we are here. We're doing great. Brandon Staley's doing a good job. Lombardi, not so much, I still think. But we're going to get there. Guys, we're in the playoffs. We're in the big dance. That's all that matters. That's all that we need to do. But from here, it's one of those things that we have to sit back and say, okay, how do we get healthy moving into the playoffs? And we're almost there. We get Bosa, we get Slater back. Guys, this team is extremely dangerous. So I'm excited to see where we're at. But what do you guys think? What are some thoughts that you have? I mean, I read all your comments. I know it's been a little difficult recently with the holidays because we've got so much family here, and family just left, so I'm super sad. But at the end of the day, they're going to get home safe, and I'm excited to be seeing them, and we'll maybe go into some playoff games. I know if we played the Tennessee Titans, we might be flying out to Tennessee for that playoff game. So as always, guys, Andrew Boboros here. See you guys in the next one.